If you're Catholic or pretty much an adherent to any Protestant mainline denomination, then it won't be news to you that church leaders and administrators have gone full in embracing modernist and postmodernist art and design with respect to, of course, church architecture, that's obvious, but also with respect to sacred and devotional art. And this is in spite of the fact that the philosophical and intellectual movements that animated this cultural shift have a lot of atheistic and agnostic tendencies. And it's also in spite of the fact that if you connect it to modernism, you may or may not know that Pope Pius X condemned it as a heresy, and not just any heresy, but the synthesis of all heresies. But some people will say, so what? We need to embrace new and innovative ways of explaining the gospel. We need to make sure that it doesn't grow stale and irrelevant. And I agree with that, if it means we need to build upon what came before as we strive to ever improve our ability to tell the story of salvation history through beauty and art. But modernist and successive movements did not do that. They discard what comes before it and then hold it very emphatically in contempt. And we literally saw this happen in the 20th century when church sanctuaries and high altars, which were these masterpieces of religious art and craftsmanship, were the victims of enthusiastic church professionals who were all too happy to embrace these new trends. So the reason I think that modern art is intrinsically incompatible with Christian worship isn't because I don't like it, even though I don't. And it isn't because it lacks universal appeal, which it does. And it isn't because it violently clashes with its surroundings, which it almost always does. It's because it doesn't satisfy what I hope to argue is an essential criterion for sacred art. And to begin exploring this topic, I think it's important for us to revisit some historical context here, because there's always been this timeless question as to whether or not Christians should even use images in worship at all. In the 16th century, Protestants very enthusiastically took up this controversy anew as they started smashing stained glass windows and chopping the heads off of statues. But this actually goes all the way back to the 8th century in the Eastern Church in the iconoclastic controversy. And the reason this confusion and controversy exists is because of the first commandment in the Decalogue, which says that God exists and that we are not to have any strange gods before him, and we are especially not to create carved images to worship. But iconoclasts took this to mean that all imagery is forbidden lest we fall into idolatry. And it says right there in scripture that we are not to create or carve any image or any likeness that is in heaven above or in the earth below or in the seas or in the water. But does that mean that all imagery is idolatrous? Well, Catholics would say no, because just a few chapters later in the book of Exodus, God explains how the Israelites are supposed to create and carve the tabernacle. And on the lid, he tells them that he wants 2 angels, cherubim, carved in gold on each side. So obviously imagery can and should be used in the context of religious piety. But the concern still stands. We should be extremely cautious when we use imagery like this because there is a risk of idolatry. And this is tricky for Christians because our faith is a sacramental faith in which invisible spiritual realities are communicated to us through our senses, through space and time, through sound and matter. And this is no better exemplified than in the incarnation of God through the person of Jesus Christ, who became flesh, who became matter, so that we could encounter him face to face, so that we could hear his voice and know him in the same way that we know other things through our sensory experience. And so for Christians, it's our instinct to try to follow that pattern and to make what is invisible visible for us. And we use this through the sacraments and also through art, where we try to take what is otherwise just an imaginary figment in our minds, the stories of salvation, the stories of the Bible, or these visions of heaven, and we try to make them explicitly visible to our eyes. And God, who is pure spirit, can seem remote, and that runs the risk of us treating him like an abstraction or a mystical force or something like a cloud. But that makes God less real, when in fact he is more real than anything we can see or touch or taste or hear. God's solution to this was to make himself as explicitly accessible to us as possible in a way that we would truly recognize this. And this was through the incarnation of Jesus. But you see this pattern and this trend accumulating through salvation history and through scripture. And this is known as revelation. It's God's effort to reveal himself to us. That's always been his approach, is to try to make himself more explicitly available and revealed to us. This is the principle that sacred art should follow. It should try to take these spiritual realities and make them less ambiguous as they might otherwise be if they were just left to our imagination. And this is exactly what historically Christians attempted to do. They tried to use representative imagery to help enhance our prayer life and to encounter God when we worshiped him, and to explain and catechize the faithful about the stories of the Bible, especially in places and time when literacy was low. But that's not what modern art does. Modern art embraces the abstract and the strange and the foreign and the novel. And the abstraction is the opposite of revelation. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that modern art is completely devoid of any merit and that it can't have visual appeal. If you like modern art and you want to hang it on your walls, that's great and fine. But what I am talking about is its use specifically in sacred art and devotion. Modern art stands in contrast to this pattern and this tradition in our stories, which took place in space and time and in history. Instead, they treat these stories and these aspects of our faith in a more incorporeal way, which is the opposite of God chose to reveal himself to us in unmistakable material presence. And if you can accept this logic, then this should help inform us as we approach controversies like what happened at the Amazon Synod with those statues that some claimed were pagan idols and other people claimed were enculturated images of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Well, the fact that nobody knew what they were is the first good indication that they are completely inappropriate for prayer and devotion. Our faith is a faith that, like J.R.R. Tolkien explained to C.S. Lewis on the eve of his conversion, is a myth that actually took place in history. It's not some tale that can be set and placed in any time or any context as we feel is appropriate. God did not leave it open to us. Mary was an actual person who lived in an actual place and an actual time. So if we're going to depict her, if we're going to try and reveal her to our senses, then we don't have the right to make her or recreate her in our own image or something that is according to our own preferences. That doesn't reveal the reality of salvation history, it obscures it. And when revelation is obscured, it leads to confusion. And when we're praying in a state of confusion, we can easily be led from that disorientation into idolatry. Thank you so much for watching that. I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you got something out of it. And if you did, and you want to consume more content like this, then please consider subscribing to my channel. Or if you saw this on Facebook, then like my page and follow along. If you're on YouTube, it's not enough anymore to subscribe because YouTube wants to think that it can tell you what you should watch instead of what you actually want to watch. So in this case, you actually have to hit that little bell to be notified as to whether or not I've uploaded something more recently. So please subscribe and hit the bell at the same time. That really helps me out a lot. And if you could consider sharing this among your social network, that helps me a lot too. And if you want to support the making of these videos, please consider supporting my business, which is a communications and strategic marketing company who specializes especially in branding and web design. And this is especially catered towards ministries and apostolates and parishes. We have a parish web design system that we've built specifically for parishes and churches that is affordable, but also beautifully packaged and easy to use. So if you're interested in that, check out my business, which is holdsworthdesign.com, and hit the contact button in the navigation and get in touch, and we can figure out if there's a good fit for you there.